Alright, so this is a review for Saga the Swamp Thing, Books 1 and 2, which is written by Alan Moore, with art by Stephen Bissett and John Tottlebean. Um, I kind of wanted to go ahead, and there's a little bit of a build-up of an interest in Swamp Thing that I've had, and this is just kind of pushing it out. And anybody that I've talked to in the Google Hangouts knows that I'm a fan of the character. This run in particular is a huge reason why I'm a fan of the character, because somebody went and recognized potential concepts with him, and they were absolutely well executed. But before I get to actually reviewing the story itself, as far as recommending it goes, um, unless you've maybe delved into a little bit of Len Wayne's run from of the character from the Roots of the Swamp Thing trade, or kind of become acquainted with Scott Snyder's run on the character, this is not the first place that you would want to start with this character. There's a lot of continuity heavy backstory which is told in this, and you need to at least have some idea of how the character came to be before you got into this. That's pretty much a huge reason why I would recommend Roots of the Swamp Thing first. Excuse me. Because Moore actually expands the mythos of the Swamp Thing quite tremendously once you get into this. With Roots of the Swamp Thing, you'll basically get laid down how Alec Holland died and became the plant creature. You'll get to examine his relationships with the Arcanes. You get kind of a running subplot because the series collects the first 13 issues, which was written by Len Wein. Bernie Wrightson does the art on the first 10, and Nestor Redondo takes over on the last 3. There's kind of this running subplot in there about Matt Cable looking to get revenge on the creature because he thinks that he's responsible for the death of the Hollands. And there's actually the prototype Swamp Thing story, which came out a year before Wine's run on the character launched. Actually, because Moore goes back to that story, and it kind of gets brought up to play in the second volume of the series. So I would absolutely recommend the Roots of the Swamp Thing, not just as a fan of the character, but just as you getting some need-to-know information before you get into Alan Moore's run on the character. Now, with that having been said, let's actually get down to this fucking review. Alan Moore obviously is a writer who needs no introduction. His stuff in the 80s is really going to be some of the best comic books that you will ever read out of this time. And it's really going to be some of his best work too, because as he kind of went on in the 90s and even up till now, he's long since fallen off with the passion that he used to have for this work. I think a lot of it has to do primarily with how much he just became disillusioned at the way that DC Comics and just the comic business in general was run. And he's kind of fallen out of doing these superhero stories. Kind of like how Garth Ennis has kind of snubbed these superhero stories in the last few years. His at least getting back into the story, Moore's run on this character is genius. Because basically what happens in the first volume is that I need to address the first issue of this. Issue 20 of the series is basically Alan Moore just kind of tying up the loose ends from the previous writer. There was this big battle with Arcane. Not really important about that. You just need to know that Arcane was dead. And it's kind of a reoccurring theme that every time Arcane pops up in the Swamp Thing mythos following this, is that no matter how much you try and kill him, he just keeps coming back. And it's kind of an interesting take, which I'll get into in the latter half of this review. But I think really the only plot device that you need to know that carried over is that Abby and Matt got married. And they're kind of having some marital problems too as they're getting into Moore's run on this character. The biggest developments that come out of this is that we find out that when we thought that Alec Holland was originally, in fact, revived as the Swamp Thing, Moore decides to go and kind of tweak the mythos by saying that Alec Holland died the very night the Swamp Thing was born. Instead, what this is that we have a plant creature who is pretty much thinking that it's Alec Holland, and when it finds out, thanks to the Floronic Man who's brought into this, he just has like this complete mental breakdown. Some scientists actually shoot him, capture him. Jason Woodrow comes in to dissect him and kind of inadvertently becomes a plant creature himself with poison ivy agendas to accelerate plant life and just absolutely wipe out humankind. And this is kind of where Moore's genius shines through in this first volume. Not just with the revelations about what the Swamp Thing is, but also for the fact that he manages to take what is, for all intents and purposes, a very obscure Z-list villain and just propel him up to these epic world-endangering heights, which I just absolutely love. And then it leaves the Swamp Thing, having to come to terms with what he is and, saving the people he cares about. In a lot of arguments, this could very well be, Moore's run on the Swamp Thing could very well be the prototype for what Todd McFarlane did with Spawn. The only thing is that Moore just had a very, I don't think that he had a specific storyline that he wanted to run with, but he found ideas that worked well with his story as he was going along and progressed it and just used them. And it turned out absolutely fantastic. We kind of develop further the relationship, particularly in between the Swamp Thing and Abigail. And Abigail is not entirely the damsel in distress in this story. She will be at some points, but she's kind of a damsel in distress that we can come to like. She's still resourceful. She's still a good person, and you really feel for her badly when she gets caught in certain situations. Just the way that Moore explores characters in this and kind of uses these psychological, real-world-based fears within this horror element just absolutely works fantastic. Bassetti's artwork and Tittlebean's artwork is fantastic. I think probably the most interesting thing about their artwork as they get into the border panels is that the borders will usually have they'll have very parallel images on them that kind of reflect off each other, usually on both sides, or they'll be on either end of the pages of the book, or they'll just be kind of in all four corners reflecting off of each other. Which is very interesting to look at. And then we kind of break down further in Revelations with Matt Cable in this book about some stuff that comes up with him. And through him, which kind of engineers the return of Anton Arcane to the story. Rereading this kind of enforces Arcane to kind of jump up in my favorite villains category just for the way that Moore writes him in this series. The idea is that Arcane is, for all intents and purposes, like just reading him, you could buy that he is very much the incarnation of evil itself. Draws out an interesting parallel between the Swamp Thing and Arcane is that, unwillingly Holland lost his arcane or lost his humanity and became this creature, and just even reading from Len Wein's run on the character and just the subsequent appearances of Arcane, each time that he comes back to life, he becomes less and less human, and more of his demonic nature is explored. Arcane is at his absolute worst in this story. He has these ambitions of world domination, which really will not be realized until Scott Snyder came onto the character and Arcane finally gets to achieve those. But in this, it lays down a very Freddy Krueger type feel for Arcane. But he's not about making jokes. He's very serious in what he does, and it is disturbingly heinous. Uh, some of the things that he does, especially to his own niece. And this just kind of reinforces my like of the character. Not because there's anything to like about him, but just for the fact that kind of as a idealized struggle of good and evil in comic book form, a lot of people would think, Batman and Joker. The idea is that Batman doesn't kill, and he will not kill the Joker, so that's kind of a contrivance for that struggle to keep on continuing. With sort of the supernatural bound in between Swamp Thing and Arcane laid down, Swamp Thing always tries to kill Arcane, and usually he'll succeed. But his taint is still there. The scars of whatever he's done are still there, and you kind of have to live with them. And it's kind of reinforced a little bit further in there again, like the Freddy Krueger aspect, is that, you can never get rid of him. The things that he has done will haunt you, and he himself will still continue to haunt you, which is why I like the idea of this character so much. And Moore just does a fantastic job of breaking him down. Other areas of interest in these two volumes will center around the fact that even though because the series in Moore's run got way too adult-oriented according to the censors of comics, DC decided to take the family-friendly logo off of this and just kind of decide to run out with the Vertigo adult line. And this is interesting in two respects. One, because even though Vertigo, even in its early times, tried to remove itself from the mainstream DC universe, DC characters will still pop up in this. There's the Justice League in the first volume when they're dealing with the Floronic Man situation. Etrigan pops up a lot in this series, and I absolutely love Moore's voice on that character. You'll get him, and there's even a point where the Swamp Thing will have to travel to Hell to rescue Abigail. He'll confront Arcane there one more time. You'll get Etrigan. You'll get Deadman, Phantom Stranger, the Spectre. If you're a fan of these characters, you'll absolutely go nuts, especially with the fact that you get all four of them in one issue, which is just absolutely awesome. Furthermore than that, if you're kind of not really sure about this character, you just think it's kind of a joke, I think an interesting way to look at it would be just imagine that this is Alan Moore writing the Sandman in a sense. And this will kind of reinforce a lot of the connections that go up in between the Vertigo books. A lot of stuff in particular, especially what happens to Matt Cable in the second volume, will be foreshadowed of how he winds up as what he is over in Neil Gaiman's Sandman. And there's a lot of foreshadowing to a lot of stuff with the Sandman that comes up in this book. A lot of stuff that will be dealt with in Hellblazer once it launches its own title. So if you're curious about this book, I would absolutely recommend it. It is fantastic. You'll get fantastic story, art, high emotional resonances running all throughout the story, and it's fantastic. I really have nothing more to say about it. So